everyone. Welcome to Headlines on A News. I'm Anita Sharma. The fate of Brazil's ex-president Jair Bolsonaro is in the hands right now of the country's highest court. The far-right politician is accused of playing a lead role in organizing a conspiracy to keep his left-wing rival and winner of Brazil's 2022 presidential election from taking office. The charges include leading an attempted coup back in January of 2023 and allegedly being part of a plot to poison Lula. What will Brazil's Supreme Court decide to do? Let's find out from political analyst Diogo Castro Silva, who joins us now from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Diogo, very good to be with you, sir.
Very good to be with you as well, Anita.
Thank you. Let's begin with these charges against Bolsonaro. What led to the events that have taken place this week?
So, as a helpful guide, it would be good to use what happened in the United States as a reference point. The events of January 6, 2020 in the U.S. and January 8th in Brazil are kind of similar in the way that the incumbent president tried to prevent the opposing president to take power. What is a big difference in Brazil is that, one, justice was kind of quicker to proceed with charges. So the events happened in January 2023 in Brazil, and we are 2 years later with the case. Secondly, the ineligibility of Bolsonaro, which is a separate issue from these criminal charges, has already been decided last year. So Bolsonaro is ineligible for future elections. And these two things made the wheels of justice, if you want, turn much quicker. Now, the political aspects of the whole cases, how the political system addresses them have similarities, because obviously when you are talking about trying past presidents in the context of elections, besides the legal aspects, there are always a political dimension. And finally, one must say that the events of January 8th are just a culmination of a process that, in fact, for the Attorney General, started 6 months before, and one could argue started even earlier by the extreme tension between Bolsonaro and especially the Supreme Court in many decisions and so forth. So if you want answering directly to your question, for the Attorney General, the beginning of, let's say, the attempted coup was 6 months prior to the event.
From Bolsonaro's point of view, Diogo, no surprise here. He denies any wrongdoing, and he says that this is essentially a witch hunt, that they're throwing anything they can at him, legally and otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the Attorney General, the consensus is that the legal accusation is a very solid one, meaning it draws upon the events, it draws upon witness, it draws upon documents, and in fact, it has, besides Bolsonaro, other 33 co-conspirators from members of the army, from members of political members and everything. So the second part is when you have coups that are attempted, that are not successful, there is always the argument on the side of who was caught in the conspiracy to say, well, it wasn't what it appears to be. It was just an event. It was just vandalism. So it's not very surprising. I mean, you have plenty of historical events. So if a coup is prevented to be fruitful, there is always will be those arguments. And third, like I said before, this is also a matter of political, how the political system effectively censors or not the actors that do this kind of act. So it's not only a legal matter for the courts, but it's also a political challenge for political parties and political actors to position themselves on this event. And the political dimension is unavoidable.
Diogo, let's talk about Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes. Now, I understand he is currently assessing the accusations made by the chief prosecutor and that he will ultimately decide whether or not Bolsonaro goes to trial.
Correct. The decision is like the Supreme Court here acts as any court.
Okay.
So the judge will decide if the case is strong enough to bring it to court, and then the case will be judged by a section of the Supreme Court with 7 members. So it's not only Alexandre de Moraes who will decide. He will be the rapporteur of the case, but and the presiding judge, but it's a collective decision, not of the whole court, but of the section of the court. But it's true that he will play this role. The general consensus is that the case is strong enough to come to court, and the decision to bring it to judgment is kind of is treated as a fait accompli.
The charges are making headlines, right, around the world. So the charges filed this week include Bolsonaro leading a criminal organization that aimed to access the country's electronic voting system, as well as, allegedly trying to kill his rival Lula and staging that coup that we talked about off the top of this interview. The validity of these charges, I guess that's what's going to be debated or is being debated right now at the highest court.
True, and I think there is another dimension it's important to take into attention, that the involvement of part of the armed forces is also a matter of big importance to the Brazilian political system. Brazil suffered numerous coups during the 20th century, some successful, some not successful. And there is also a sentiment in the political system that it is time for the military, who had never faced the consequences of attempted or coups, or successful or unsuccessful, had never faced consequences. So there is also a dimension that the political system wants also to solve the matter of civil and military relations and the role that the military can play in political conflicts a little bit once and for all in the political Brazilian system. So there are matters that go beyond even just the Bolsonaro issue.
Staying with Bolsonaro, though, we have a very different geopolitical landscape now as of 2025, with U.S. President Donald Trump returning to the Oval Office in D.C. Bolsonaro, of course, there's been so many nicknames, if you will, that liken him to Trump. They call him Tropical Trump, amongst many other terms. How could the presence now of U.S. President Donald Trump, as well as who they happen to call the shadow president, Elon Musk, how can these gentlemen or can they help Bolsonaro now as he seeks to return to power in 2026, but as you just mentioned, faces quite the uphill battle, given that he's technically barred from seeking office until 2030?
True. I mean, the connection between the US and Brazil is big. Mm-hmm. If you want, in the case, if Biden would not have been president in 2023, yeah. I think the chances of Bolsonaro being successful would have increased. The Secretary of Defense at the time, the Pentagon, were very instrumental in boxing here the military not to support Bolsonaro. So going forward now, I would say the presence of Trump in the White House will also play a role. I don't see so much a role of reversing the ineligibility of Bolsonaro for the 26 election, which I think it's too late. He will try to pressure, but I think that ship has sailed. But more in the case of electing someone that is friendly to Bolsonaro and then can have a showdown with the Supreme Court regarding pardoning Bolsonaro, regarding trying to make Bolsonaro eligible again. So, in fact, having a round two of confrontation between the Supreme Court and Congress. So Musk, especially Musk, through the social media, but not only him, they will play a role in all of this campaign. They have connections here to Bolsonaro and to many in his entourage. So they will try to play a role in the run-up to 2026 and what comes after 2026 in the case of a rematch of all of these issues we are discussing right now.
Okay, so that's incredibly fascinating because for anyone who's trying to connect the dots as they read all the articles that are out and watching the news, including A News, about this subject, some folks are having trouble comprehending how he can return to office given the fact that he's barred until 2030. We've already seen how influential Elon Musk was in helping Donald Trump return to the Oval Office. Is what you're saying that in this case, heading to 2026 elections in Brazil, Musk and company could essentially create the same sort of fervor, the same sort of popularity and fascination online that could encourage someone to come to power that will essentially help Bolsonaro, make him eligible again, make him great again.
Correct. After 2020, correct. And one has to see this in the context of the tensions inside of the political system that are not, they don't end with Bolsonaro, whatever role he will play. For Musk, the Supreme Court of Brazil, it's an enemy. Brazil was last year the only jurisdiction, let's say, in the Western world that successfully obliged Elon Musk to comply with regulations and, in fact, pay fines in Brazil. And so there is a personal animosity, and there is this role that he's playing not only in the US, but like in the German elections that we are going to have pretty soon, as a political player outside of the US in terms of political movements that he finds that have affinity with his agenda. In Brazil, part of the right, not all of them, but part of them have this affinity. So he will find a receptive audience.
It is.
The possibility.
Go ahead, sir.
There are limitations, for example, here in Brazil in terms of financing. All election financing is public, not private, but he can play a role through social media for sure.
It really is a fascinating time, is it not? Because all eyes are essentially on Elon Musk. At least many of the eyes are on Elon Musk to see how this all plays out. Bolsonaro aside, to your point, it is going to be in the U.S., the current U.S. administration's best interest to have a government in power in Brazil, a very powerful country that supports, at least ideologically, the plans, the initiatives that Trump and company have for the United States of America and the rest of the world.
Correct. And if you look in terms of geopolitics on what seems to be the direction of the Trump administration, which is a kind of big man diplomacy where the world is divided between spheres of influence, there seems a kind of philosophical thrust of having the Americas, again, as in a new Monroe doctrine of being the U.S. backyard. And in that sense, south of Rio Grande, Brazil is the largest country. And having a government in Brazil that is allied to this agenda would be seen as very favorable by the U.S., by this current administration, I would say.
Diego, Brazil is arguably, or not, there is even no argument here. It's a powerhouse when it comes to exports. We know that Trump now is just engaged in tariffs, slapping tariffs left, right, and center, giving Canada and Mexico, or Canada at least, a brief reprieve temporarily. Let's see how that situation unfolds at the end of this month. But he's also going to be looking at alternatives, right? And one alternative could be once he has a supportive ear in Brazil in the highest office, he'll be even more prone, one would think, to be perhaps even more, can I use the word aggressive, in achieving his initiatives, knowing that a country like Brazil is behind him with all that agriculture, with all those exports that could potentially go straight to the United States in a bigger way.
Correct. And so the question of, so if we just focus on Bolsonaro, I think we are missing, because like I said, Bolsonaro will play a political role in the 2026 elections. Yeah. But it is whoever the battle on the right will be, who is the who is the patron of the candidate that will emerge on the right to dispute against Lula, who seems to be going for re-election, because whoever is, let's say, has more control of this candidate, that then there is all the agenda you are speaking about after 2026. So what are the political forces that will be more determined in a potential future candidate? I think that's more the game. And then all the agenda immediately after 2026, Bolsonaro in prison, outside of prison, will always be a relevant actor, and whoever appears from that political space has a very good chance of winning the election. So that is where the 2026 will be played.
What is the current atmosphere in Brazil right now? What is the current feeling? Is there optimism, pessimism with respect to the current government and the processes that are currently in place for the country?
Brazil is very polarized, like I think all democracies nowadays. I think it's a matter of, it's a feature, not a bug. Secondly, I would say, so the insatisfaction always with the incumbent, being the incumbent from the left, from the right, from the center left, from the center, is also a permanent feature. I think it's very hard to be optimistic. I think people feel that the geopolitical context and the world is a much darker place nowadays than was when the whole BRICS story started. So if one compares with the early 2000s, full of optimism and so forth,
right,
that is not the case today. I think there is a lot more anxiety about the future, about the government. I think that is more, like I said, a kind of feature, not a bug. But I think overall less of economic optimism because people read the news that come from all around the world, and they are not in a very positive aspect. But on this, what happened with the charges with Bolsonaro, they were totally expected. So there is not a big shock about them. It doesn't change the overall climate because I think people were totally expecting these charges, and the fact that they came relatively swiftly after the events also helps in that sense that people, have the memory of the events very fresh.
All right, fascinating discussion all the way around. Diogo Castro Silva, thank you so much for joining us, sir. And we will be watching very closely
Thanks for having me.
To see how this all pans out. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Anita Sharma for Headlines on A News.